As we start our last module of exercise science, we start to get into nutrition, and you will take nutrition classes as you move on through your academic career. But when we look at nutrition from this perspective, we're going beyond just food guide recommendations, and we're looking more at the physiological responses that the foods are having. And nutrition and food is a big part of your exercise progress, your performance, your enhancement, your longevity and fitness. And when we have this conversation, we want to start looking, make sure we look at our scope of practice. And we want to start looking at the difference between like a dietitian and like someone that's a registered dietitian that has credentials within the field versus what your scope of practice within the personal training. And the very first thing we look at is this concept of meal plans and prescription. That's what RX stands for. And when you look at like writing a specific thing down for an individual, you are now getting in from the field of personal training and starting in the scope of practice of the registered dietitian. One of the things you don't want to do, which is very popular, is recommend specific supplements, and you definitely do not want to get into disease and conditions. And based on the legal scope of practice, fitness professionals should not calculate, outline, or prescribe individual nutrition or weight management plans. What we can do, and which is what the most important thing is, which is empowering the client, is you want to provide education. So helping people understand what they're eating, how this is, and pointing them in the right direction. This is the focus of your nutritional aspect. It's the same as what's happening right now and what's going to happen in this lecture. At the end of this lecture, I have not told you how many grams of carbohydrates to eat or what to eat or what to stay away from. All I've done is provide education based on the research that's out there, shown what I would have done or how I could have done it, and empowering you, the individual, to make these decisions for yourself. And that's exactly what you're going to do for your clients. You are going to take them through the process of understanding the nutrients, the things that your body needs, understanding how to balance that and to get the physiological responses that are best suited for them. But you're not going to tell them how many grams of protein to eat, what to eat in the morning. You might explain to them what a carbohydrate is, what a vegetable is, what a protein is. But that's just basic education. And so no one can stop you from educating people. It's when you cross over to that and start writing specific plans for a specific individual where you start to get in trouble. So anyways, throughout this course, this particular module, we're going to go through nutrients. We're going to look at macronutrients and the micronutrients that are associated with that. So we'll look at vitamins and the food sources that are happening from that. We might talk about key aspects of the vitamin profile, and not just the minimal you need not to get disease, but where you should be looking at for enhancing performance. Most of the vitamins are coming from plant material, things that are carbohydrate based. We'll be talking about minerals, basically rocks from the ground that need to be absorbed into the plants, and you have your spectrum of minerals that you need and the nutrients and the vitamins that you need. We'll talk a lot about hydration in terms of the water and the fluid requirements that are required, and then the most important aspect, we'll look into metabolism. So how the food you're eating, how is it getting incorporated into the tissues for growth, energy production, and performance. So in order to have this conversation, we need to start with the digestive system itself. And this is it in its entirety. You have it starting in the mouth, salivary glands. You have the enzymes that are created from the liver and the pancreas. You have the stomach, which is the primary place for mechanical digestion, where it mixes with acidic gastric juices. And then the most important part of the digestive system is the absorption. So it's not what you eat, it's what you absorb, and it goes through the intestines, both small and large, ends up coming out. And digestion does start in the mouth. The mechanical digestion from mastication from the teeth, the saliva and the different enzymes that are there to start breaking down carbohydrate, fats, and proteins, and the mixing of fluid so you can swallow. And it starts in the mouth, goes through the entire digestive system, ends up through the intestine, and its final destination of undigested plant material. Yes, poop. But here's our digestive system in its whole, but it really can be visualized in a long tube. And you have, starting from the mouth to the anus, right? So food coming in and then waste product coming out. You have the propulsion, which is happening through the smooth muscle, right? The peristalsis of like the pushing through. Remember, everything's really depicted as a tube, but it's really a flat surface as food's going through. You have chemical digestion that starts in the mouth and is accelerated through the stomach. You have the mechanical digestion that is happening through the churning, the stomach itself folding in on itself and breaking up food even further, mixing it with enzymes from the pancreas and maybe bile from the gallbladder and starting to break things down. And then it starts its journey through the small intestine, which is several hundred yards long in terms of, or several hundred feet long in terms of its journey. And the surface area of the intestine, because this is where absorption is happening, is quite large, several hundred square yards large. And you can see all these little like protrusions, these microvilli that are sticking out. And these are nothing more than single thin-walled aspects that are barrier between your insides and the outside environment. And yes, inside the stomach is still considered external environment. And you have your blood vessels, like your capillary chains that are coming through that are picking up the food that's broken down. And you can see here, you don't see food, you don't see protein or carbohydrate or fat. You see the smallest components. You see fatty acids, amino acids, and glucose that are being picked up, or monosaccharides that are being picked up by the blood. So the body is trying to break everything down into its smallest component to utilize for the building blocks for whatever it needs to do. This is driven by a whole flora of microbiology within the gut and the digestive system. So you have bacteria that are all along the way that are helping this process, either converting things to vitamins and nutrients, breaking things down, destroying things that shouldn't be there, or try to help the detoxification pathway. This is a familiar slide to us. We looked at this in the bioenergetics, but now we're looking at it from the aspect of when you take food in, things that we recognize as food, steak, fish, eggs, avocados, whatever it is, after it passes your mouth and you swallow it, it's no longer recognizable as steak, egg, French fries, or fish. All the body's looking at now is what can I extract from it? What proteins are there? What carbohydrates are there? And what triglycerides or fats are there. And then even further, the body's trying to take this down and break it down more into its individual constituents. So you're looking at amino acids, you're looking at individual sugar molecules, and you're looking at individual fatty acids. And that's it. The body doesn't recognize it any more than what that is. So whether you drink milk, blood, or protein water, the body doesn't care. It doesn't recognize it as blood or milk or meat or protein water. It recognizes it as potential amino acids, how much sugar, and which fatty acids am I getting. And all of this is under the backdrop of this ADP, ATP recycling. At least for sugar. For fat and for protein, there are other functions in terms of, do I want to use that to build up more tissue, or do I have other functions for that? But where we're talking about now is looking at the food intake. So we're looking at the recommendations that are here for how do we optimize our physiology to maximize those things that we just talked about. And to look at this, we need to look at our government's involvement in our recommendations. And for almost a century, the U.S. government has been involved in food recommendations, very little of which has been based on science until about the 1990s, 1980s, but most of it was based on agricultural production. So the USDA didn't really team up with the Health and Human Services until 1992, where the food guide pyramid really became the primary aspect. And the food guide pyramid, again, not so much based on science, but based on consumption. And there's you can go do a search online and find a lot of critiques of it. I personally would get rid of the bottom, and that's probably all I would do. Get rid of the bottom and keep that there, and you have a fairly good food guide pyramid. And the problem with this is that what you've done with these dietary recommendations is you've taken a very complex topic like nutrition and physiology, and you've dumbed it down and tried to get like a guideline, a recommendation. And let me reemphasize guideline, not science, a guideline, something that's going to be there, and it has to be adjusted accordingly. And so they took that in consideration after 1980s and the start of the 1980s, and then 1992, eventually switching to the My Pyramid, and kind of really no difference, just kind of looked at it from a different perspective. And now the government provides the My Plate, so the USDA and Health and Human Services. This is of 2005. 2005 replaced the My Pyramid, and then since 2011, so the last 9-10 years or so, My Plate has been the recommendation. And you can see it's a little better. You can see that at least 50% of your caloric intake should be coming from produce, so plants. Only a quarter from grains, and a little bit less for protein. And then dairy is still considered a thing. But again, dairy is a protein, just like beans are a protein, except for we don't have a dairy industry that we're trying to support. So that's why dairy still has its own separate aspect. But for the most part, that's your recommendation. And then based on your total caloric intake, as long as you can hit these ratios, you should be solid. And the reason why they look at these ratios, or at least caloric intake, is they want to balance the so-called obesity epidemic that we have. And we remember this slide from when we looked at bioenergetics. We looked at weight loss versus weight gain. That energy in is your carbohydrate, protein, fat. These are your energy producing or energy yielding macronutrients. And that has to be balanced with energy out when you look at your digestion, your physical activity, and resting metabolism. And the big takeaway from this is that resting metabolism is your largest energy output. And so making sure you're focusing on lean body mass or preserving lean body mass is a big part of your fitness goals. And thought process is that if you energy in equals your energy out, you will maintain your weight. But if something becomes off balance and your energy in is less or your energy output is more, you'll end up with weight loss. And then opposite, if you end up eating more, your weight gain. And the goal is to kind of have this maintenance. And this is a gross oversimplification of exercise, or at least human physiology, and a lack of understanding of the caloric aspect. And that is more complex than just eat less and do more, which is your first big separation from you versus registered dietitians in terms of you're not looking at calorie counts, you're not looking at macros, you're looking at maybe quality over quantity, and that will start to make more sense. But this energy balance aspect is incomplete. Again, calories consumed greater than calories expended, you're going to have positive energy balance, you're going to gain weight. Calories consumed less than calories expended, lose weight, and it's as simple as that. Unfortunately, it doesn't play out that way. But let's continue with the recommendations to make sure we understand what we are criticizing. So this is the food guide pyramid, or the My Plate divided up. You have about 45 to 65% of your energy coming from carbs, 20 to 35% coming from fat, and 10 to 35% coming from protein. Just pay attention that the amount of fat that you should be eating is equal to the amount of protein you should be eating. Everyone's always like so heads up on this low-fat diet, like fat should be near zero, but even the recommendations are looking at 20 to 35% fat. What they want you to restrict is your total saturated fat, which is less than 10%. But again, what you see on the left, you're looking at total caloric intake for the average mature male between 20 and 55 years old. If you're sedentary, 2,200 calories, and if you're active, 2,800 calories. Notice that your physical activity is such a small part of that. It's only a 600 calorie differential, right? But 2,000 of those calories, 2,200 of those calories is coming from just your basal metabolic rate. You can see a little bit different for females, more so because of the lack of lean body mass or the just smaller statute and size. Just recall that calories are a measure of heat. So if you burn that calorie externally, how much energy that's given off, that is the potential energy that's there. Doesn't mean that you've used all of it. It's just potentially you have that all there. And when you look at the energy provision from your macronutrients, proteins produce roughly 4 kilocalories per gram. Fats are 9 kilocalories per gram, and carbohydrates are 4 kilocalories per gram. And this is actually where the whole fat phobia started, was that they looked at fat being 9 calories per gram, and if you were to replace fat with either protein or carbohydrate, you would theoretically have the same food bulk but have less energy density. And that's what ushered in the 1980s, the big like fat-free aspect. That's where you start seeing like disgusting fat-free sour cream and low-fat everything. And it was a miserable failure, right? And what they ended up finding was that fat was a satiation aspect where it kept you full longer, had very little effect on blood sugar levels, and the replacement of fat with sugar started the obesity epidemic and diabetes, some argue. I'll let you decide that on your own with your research. It's interesting to think that these carbohydrate, protein, fat calories are averages, and so the actual calories vary, particularly when you look at like fats, because fats come in short chain, medium chain, and long chain fatty acids. The longer the chain, the more energy. The shorter the chain, the less energy. And so fats actually have a yield between 3 to 12 calories per gram. So that means some fat is less energy dense and some fat is more energy dense. It just, in the end, comes to that calorie counting assumes a lot of things, and it's one of the things that can create a lot of stress for a lot of clients and people, and it's not generally recommended if you're trying to educate someone and get someone to be independent, to waste all their time looking through all these numbers that in the end are nothing more than averages, estimates, and may be off by 300 to 400 calories in either direction. And why that's important looking at the 300 to 400 calories is that when you look at 1 pound of fat, it's about 3,500 calories. So just think about that for a second. If your caloric intake is about anywhere between 2,200 and 1,800 calories per day for a sedentary individual, that means you have almost 2 days worth of food stored in just 1 pound of excess body fat. 1 pound of muscle is debatable. It can be between 700 calories and 2,200 calories, but roughly 1,200 calories to look at from a pound of muscle. But the reason we focus on the pound of fat is that if you were to reduce your caloric intake or increase your metabolic output by 500 calories per day, that should equate to about 1 pound of fat loss per week. And it is acceptable. The maximal rate of fat loss appears to be 1% of the total body mass per week, which means that early on in your fitness career, you're going to lose a lot more. You're going to lose weight a lot faster. But as you get leaner, it becomes less and less. 1% of 200 is 2, right? And the 1% of 100 is 1. And you see that as you go on each week, you lose a smaller percentage. This can discourage a lot of people because they think that they're hitting a plateau when really they're just getting closer to their fitness goals. It's a lot easier to double your strength early on when you're weak than it is when you're at almost your peak, right? So it's not linear, your progression, it's more exponential. The safe weight loss is between 1 and 2 pounds per week, and this is anywhere between 500 to 1,000 calorie deficit per day. So that's quite a bit. If it's done with nutrition, trying to diet from a purging perspective, you have physiological consequences. And if you try to do too much purging from an energy output aspect, there are physiological consequences. So it comes back to the whole 1 step back, 2 steps forward. If you try to lose too much weight too soon, you can end up in a physiological nightmare. And as we'll learn in KIN 231, weight loss is never, ever the goal. Fat loss is, weight loss no. We want to make sure that we're losing fat tissue and not metabolically active muscle tissue. We want to maintain that resting metabolism or increase that resting metabolism. That is our biggest energy output, more than physical activity. And so the more lean body muscle you have, the better it's going to be for you to manage your energy intake for physical function. Lean body mass is functional tissue. It allows you to perform and deal with your environment. Fat is not afunctional, it's just not as functional as muscle, but the common gym adage is you can't flex fat. Fat has its own set of functional purposes, but producing force and generating tension and running fast is not part of that. So I regress that fat loss is the goal, not weight loss. But there are many paradoxes that exist that people can still overeat or appear to overeat and still lose or maintain weight, and people can undereat and still gain or maintain weight. And so it's not as simple as just energy in, energy out. We are biological, physiological organisms, not machines. And so we can't say that our thermostat, the rate at which we burn food, is consistent. This is 100% driven by things that you're doing, things that you're thinking, and things that you have done. So there's more complex. And I love this article in Scientific America, and it's based on a couple other, but it's a really easily accessible article, and it's basically revealing why calorie counts are wrong, and that it's not just what you eat that you put in your mouth, it is what your body actually digests and absorbs, and then the destination of that absorption after it gets into the bloodstream. What hormonal environment is there? Are you in a fat storage environment? Are you in a muscle building environment? Is it post-work exercise? So again, not that calories are wrong, counting calories is bad and calories wrong, or everything that's been told to you has been a lie. It's just been a piercing of the veil. And there's more complex than that. And instead of trying to simplify it and throw everything out, we really want to investigate and find out what's really going on. And as I shared in a previous lecture, the first thing is that a calorie is not a calorie. Right? So 100 calories of M&Ms is going to have a different physiological effect than 100 calories of chicken breast. 1,000 calories of broccoli is going to be different than 1,000 calories of celery. Just the mere bulk or volume of it alone. 500 calories of nuts is going to be like a handful of nuts, whereas 500 calories of celery is going to be like 4 or 5 heads of celery. So there's quite a bit of things that can differ in terms of density, relationship, and then the glucose versus the protein versus the fat. What hormones are you releasing? And so the eat less, do more, as I had shared, is a gross oversimplification of human physiology. And we have this slide here where we're going to get into details. when you eat, so not just the when you eat, but the timing of your food. Is your feeding window 8 hours and your non-feeding window 16 hours, or is it vice versa? There's going to be virtually no difference in the total caloric intake, but vast differences in the physiological adaptations. What you eat, like the quality of food, not just your quantity, and I would even argue the quality of your food is way more important than the quantity. What you've done 3 hours before, so was it post-workout? What you plan on doing 3 hours after? Are you going to go for a run? Are you going to go for a nap? And the most important aspect is which hormonal environment did you create in introducing that food into?